more concerned now about this release from Tulsi Gabbard and the talk about, manipulating intelligence, for the 2016 election,
right,
and Russian collusion and all of that. That speaks more to the agency than the Epstein files does, just from a, whose responsibility is whose, right? This is Epstein thing is a DOJ, FBI issue. I think if they're concerned about it, it's because of how it erodes trust in organizations, institutions, right? And that's happened a lot. So, there's a lot of good people. I know, again, every time I talk about the agency, people are like, fuck you, you're such a shill. But there's a lot of good people doing very difficult work for the agency.
I believe
right?
that. I believe that.
And so, I think, if anything, they take it personally when people think, fuck the CIA, you gotta burn it down and start over again, like they said with the FBI as well.
I've talked about that many times. Like, you don't know what the fuck is going on in the world. The world is filled with chaos. Like, you need people that are paying attention to that shit, and they should be on your side.
Yeah.
They should be on the side of the American people, paying attention to threats. If you think that not paying attention at all is going to do you any good when there's all these countries out there that are fucking plotting constantly, you're crazy.
Yeah. No.
You're living in a utopia. You're living in a fake world. The real world is filled with madness. And you got to have people paying attention to it.
Yeah. But I think that, to answer that question, I think they're more focused on or interested in or, looking at this issue of, and it's surfaced again right at the same time as the Epstein files, right? Now it's like sucking all the oxygen out of the room for the past couple of days. Tulsi Gabbard comes out and says, I'm releasing these documents. She releases these documents.
What do you think about all that? Like, so this is the accusation. They're throwing around the word treason.
Yeah.
They're saying that Obama knew that Russia did not meddle in the election, did not have any impact in the election, but yet promoted this idea. And then there's been some incredible clips of all these different news reporters, CNN and MSNBC, just saying over and over and over again, clear evidence of Russian collusion. And
and you got Hillary Clinton saying, is an air of illegitimacy around Trump's, victory, from 2016 because of this. I mean, she was very clear about it, and as were many others.
The noose is tightening on Trump.
Yeah.
It's all going to come out. He's an agent of Russia.
Yeah, Adam Schiff coming out on camera numerous times saying, I can't tell you what I've seen, but I've seen things. There's a lot more than circumstantial evidence about this collusion. So, but again, it's much more it's always the same thing. It's much more complex than what folks tend to hear just in like a 2.5 or 3 minute news segment, right? So the Democrats want you to think there's nothing to see here in these documents. How could you possibly spend time doing this? You're just trying to distract from the Epstein files. And the Republicans are saying Obama committed treason, right? The reality is, as it oftentimes is somewhere in that middle, right? There's a lot of conflating of issues here. So nobody is questioning, not Republicans or Democrats, nobody's questioning that the Russians meddled in the election, just like they did in the previous one, just like they did in this last one. Just like but they've been meddling since World War II, right? Since the end of World War II. They've always had an interest in influencing U.S. politics.
Now, when you say meddle, do you mean like social media bots? Do you mean like influencing politicians? Like, what do you mean by meddle?
Yeah, well, I mean, in the early days, what were they doing? In the early days, they would pay off trade union representatives, right, to push a certain line, to push for a softer tone, much like the Chinese do now, push for a softer tone against the Soviet Union, right, or during World War II to push for isolationism, keep the U.S. out of the war, right, before the Nazis turned on the Soviet Union and then they tended to need us, or they would pay journalists to write articles pushing a particular point of view. And so there were those things. Now, social media meddling is a lot easier, right? It's a lot cheaper.
For sure they do that.
Yeah, for sure they do that.
And for sure they did that in 2016.
Yeah, absolutely, and nobody's questioning that, right? What's happening is that, once again, there's a bit of a messaging problem from the Trump administration. The Trump administration, at the end of the day, is saying, what was bullshit was this Russia collusion angle, right? Was the idea that, this is complicated to explain, and I'm not doing a very good job of it, but they're saying, yes, there was meddling, but you pushed a story, meaning Brennan and Comey and all the others that were involved in this, and then going up to the top with Obama, saying you took what was a Intel Community Assessment, an ICA is because everything has an acronym, that said there was no indication of Russian efforts to push or influence in a particular direction the election, right? And most of that initial reporting was on election infrastructure. So there was a fairly significant bit there that said the Russians weren't able to hack into election machines and actually alter vote counts, right? So they said we have seen no evidence of that, right? And so you could argue that in part the Trump administration is having a hard time explaining, much like I am, that the problem here wasn't that there was anybody saying there's no meddling. There's meddling. They just saying that you, at a certain point, around about December 9th, I think it was, you had a meeting where Obama was sitting in there with Comey and Andrew McCabe and a variety of others, and the president himself requested a different intelligence community assessment, which is a little unusual for a president to say, I'd like you to do an ICA on a particular thing, which is what he did.
Can you elaborate on that? Like, so they were telling him what?
Well, they were telling him we don't see that Russian meddling impacted the election, basically. The Dems are saying, well, that's just about the electronic infrastructure, about the voting machines, right? In reality, the ICA was also that instruction, the PDB, the President's Daily Brief, and the writing that had been done, the analysis that had been done up to that point was saying, we haven't seen anything that the Russian meddling influenced the outcome of the election. Well, then, shortly, and then they squashed that particular piece, right? They said, let's shelve that. And that's what a lot of the emails that Tulsi Gabbard released show, right? It's like all this agonizing. It's amazing any shit gets done in the government when you read these emails going back and forth between James Clapper at the DNI and other places.
Yeah, you sent me some of that stuff to go through.
Yeah, the analysts and others. And they're all saying, okay, well, what kind of tone do we give it? What do we say about this? And you can also see in there that they're saying, we don't think the Steele dossier is credible. The two senior Russian analysts, right, at the agency were telling John Brennan at the time, if you put the dossier in there as a piece of information into this assessment, you're compromising the credibility of the whole thing because we don't believe it, right? And this is December, right? And Brennan instructed, and it's in writing, instructed them to go ahead and do it, right? Because it basically, he liked the narrative, right, of the Steele dossier.
Right.
And so he chose that over the analytical process, right, over the discipline that you need to corroborate information that's going to go to a high-level intel assessment. So, if anybody's in the crosshairs right now, it's probably John Brennan, right, in terms of, because he went up on Capitol Hill at some point and said that, the Steele dossier didn't form an important point of, wasn't in the document, wasn't in the ICA. The ICA is now out there, and sure enough, it was not only in the annex, it was in the body of the report, which gives it much more credibility. So, yeah, so he, I'm not a lawyer, but, I think he should be concerned a little bit about where that might go. But Obama reportedly, and it's in email traffic, requested, right, a different ICA. And so shortly thereafter, they produced a report.
How does he say it?
I forget what the exact wording. I'm not going to
get
it.
Because that's a crazy thing. If you have a bunch of experts
Yeah.
that give you an assessment, this is the facts. This is how it went down. You're like, I don't like those facts.
Well, I don't think he said I don't like the
it.
facts, and that's where this is going to be a problem. Anybody who thinks Obama's going to go to prison for treasonous conspiracy, I think, again, much like Pam Bondi, with her treating of the Epstein files, which was ridiculous, Tulsi Gabbard's gotten out over her skis. Treasonous conspiracy.
Is that what she said?
That's what she said. It's not going to happen. Anybody who thinks that Obama's going to, forget about it. You'll be lucky if you get any consequences of anything out of this. Again, I'm very cynical about where investigations go.
Well, isn't this also based on the Supreme Court's justification of everything that Trump did while he was in office?
Right.
So you can't try them for things they do when they're off.
Yeah, immunity for acting under the authority as a president. But so, and it's also very nuanced, right? He can sit in there. He's perfectly got the right to sit in a meeting and say, okay, well, I tell you what, let's sit on this, right? And James Clapper and the others agreed, yeah, we're gonna take this document and we're gonna set it aside that we all worked on. Now we want to restructure it, focused on the outcome of the election and the Russian meddling and where this went and how they. So it was he can do that, right? And it's nuanced, and he can and never get in trouble because you're fine. You got the right to do that. I mean, it's not illegal by any means, but there is no doubt in my mind that there was a desire to drive this thing in a certain direction, right? And so there is no doubt in my mind that, first of all, using the Steele dossier in there was just horseshit, right? Because that thing, there hasn't been any allegation in that Steele dossier that's been verifiable, and they knew that, right? So they went, and they used that Steele dossier in part to then go to FISA courts and get warrants, right? So that's another issue that I think from a legal perspective, again, not a lawyer, but I think some people should be probably concerned about how they represented that information, knowing, right, based on kind of what we're seeing from the document releases from Tulsi Gabbard. But again, you can see by virtue of how difficult I'm trying to explain this, it's much more complex, right, than just them bad, these guys good, these guys good, these guys bad, right? There's layers here that I think need to be examined, and I think that at the end of the day, you're not really going to get, much like everything else that happens in D.C., you're not going to get a lot of satisfaction on this one. But I do think, I'm convinced that, they drove this narrative. Shortly after, into January, when they released the new ICA, then suddenly leaks to the press, and that's when the Russia collusion story happened, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that they should be focused on, right? They're losing the message because they're throwing shit out there. There's a lot of detail, and people get bored, and so I think that's a problem they're going to have here, trying to push this thing forward. And I do think also that Tulsi Gabbard should have been a little bit more circumspect in the way she explained this, right, and how she described the actions. Because I think there were some people who are culpable in terms of going after this narrative and pushing this Russia collusion story that then wasted a couple of years and, God knows how much money on investigations and impeachment hearings and all the rest of it. But
why do you think she chose to frame it that way? Do you think she was instructed to do that, or she was guided to do that, or encouraged to do that? Because if it's not warranted, if you don't believe it's warranted based on the evidence that you've looked at, like, she's the director of national intelligence. Yeah. How does?
Well, I think she's part of it is the realization that, look, I mean, you put that information out there. I think it would have been more appropriate if she'd released all the documentation, said, here's, and lay out in a very good, like almost like a PowerPoint presentation for the, make it very simple for the press, because the press isn't inclined to pursue this because the press were complicit, right? So you're trying to say, this is what these people did, and you helped them. Right. Now what we want is for you, meaning the media, to uncover all of this and report on it. They were winning awards, journalistic awards, for their coverage of the Russia collusion story. Right. So the idea that they're going to somehow now say, that was a problem. So I think they should have maybe just made this more factual based, stayed away from the sort of the hyperbolic statements about treason and all the rest of it, and then tried to explain it to the American public in a way that they can digest a little bit better, right? But when you throw out things like treasonous conspiracy, once again, much like with the Epstein thing, you're creating this kind of howling mob that's going to expect something, right? Mm-hmm. And I just don't know that they're going to get it. But
right. So do you think that it's possible that she was encouraged to do this because this kind of takes away some of the heat off of the Epstein thing? I'm
sure that was a thought process in there somewhere. Yeah,
possibly.
Yeah, I think
it's a reasonable assumption.
Look, it's an important issue, right? If you have the intel community, or you have the White House deciding to themselves, look, we know this information is kind of bullshit, but it certainly serves a narrative, which is we want to delegitimize the new president that's coming in because we can't stand him. Then that's a really, really serious problem that needs to be examined.
It's also so short-sighted because do you not know that information is eventually going to come out that's going to compromise the confidence that people have in anything that the intelligence agencies put forth after that?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of, part of what was going on was the expectation that Hillary Clinton was going to win, right? So, like with the Steele dossier, try to, dig up leverageable information or dirt on Trump. I think they were all under the assumption, well, Hillary Clinton's going to win. Doesn't really matter what we do right now because she's going to cover for us, right?
Right.
And, I don't think they ever expected Trump to win. So, then suddenly they've got to shift course a little bit and think, okay, all right, well, now that didn't work. Now what? Well, let's say that we've got this document over here talking about Russian meddling. Is it that much of a push to kind of say that, that we believe there might have been collusion? And the media ran with it. Right? They didn't have to do much.
They ran with it for 3 years.
For 3 years, yeah.
3 years, hardcore, all the time. Every time they talked about Trump.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. Regardless of how you feel about Trump, if you're the biggest Trump hater in the world, I understand. But understand this, that is dangerous. It's dangerous to have the media in lockstep with the government who's saying something that's not true.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and they scream about, threats to democracy all the time. Let's just be a little bit more self-aware. Realize, what that looked like, right? You can't, people were just bullshitting about evidence that they had or that they saw. Right?
Well, the
They kept
Democrats
talking about
saying
it.
anything's a threat to democracy
Yeah.
is wild when they haven't had a primary since 2012. That's wild.
Yeah.
That's really wild. I mean, they kicked Bernie out. They made sure RFK Jr. wasn't in. And then when it came time for Kamala to run, no primary at all. They just put her in position.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah, they didn't know what else to do. And by the way, there's so much going on right now. Today, speaking of Kamala and now we're going to speak about Biden, but today, what was his name? The chief of staff, the former chief of staff for Biden. I think he was only there for a couple of years. Ron Klain was up on Capitol Hill to talk because they're holding these interviews up on Capitol Hill to try to figure out what the hell was going on, right? At what point did people decide they're going to cover up the mental condition of Joe Biden? And that's another look. I mean,
And then they're all pleading the fifth.
They're all pleading the fifth. Kevin O'Connor, the White House doctor, pled the fifth. Senior advisor to Joe Biden, what's his name? Andrew Bernal, pled the fifth, right? And Ron Klain apparently stayed up there for a couple hours talking, right? But, again, he wasn't there for the last couple of years of the administration, I think, but he was there for the debate prep, right? And he's come out publicly and said, I was shocked at his condition. So, people...
I think they set him up for failure in that debate.
No.
Why? First of all, why are they having a debate that late? Why would they agree to a debate at 9 p.m.?
Yeah.
When you got a guy who's really old and kind of broken down. Why would you do that?
Television timing, who knows?
And it seemed like, didn't someone blame it on him being on Ambien?
Yeah, Hunter did.
Hunter did.
That fantastic interview that Hunter just did with, I forget his name, Andrew Callahan or something like that. He referenced, now he's walking it back, saying, I wasn't meaning that he was on Ambien during the debate. I'm just saying, they had him on Ambien because it was his travel schedule. The guy was at Camp David and resting in Delaware for 10 days prior to the debate. So, yeah, I don't know.
Jesus. What a mess. I think they set him up. I think they wanted him out, and this is the way to do it. Get him in the debate. Don't give him his medicine.
Excuse me.
Don't give him the proper medication to keep him up and peppy, and let him out there all confused. And apparently he had a cold at the time, too. So it was...
But if they were going to do that, wouldn't you think that they would... have a better plan, a plan B?
No, they didn't have a plan. And I think the Biden administration, the people didn't want him to step down. There's people inside the organization that didn't want him to step down, particularly, supposedly, Jill. Jill did not want him to step down. But then there's the cancer thing. Like, how do they not know that he has cancer? Well, they
Stage
had to
4.
know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. Like, that's
Sorry, man. Got a
years
cough.
of developing.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think if there was a plan, if there was a nefarious plan to have him step down, I think they thought he would get through it. I think they did.
He might have if he performed the way he performed in the first debate.
Yeah, I don't know. It seems to me that they were caught in the headlights at the point where he
Take
did
some
so
water,
poorly.
buddy.
Yeah,
So much shit.
I know. I sound
Jesus
like
Christ, what the fuck is
damn,
going on
I
with
know.
you?
Yeah,